Hello, everyone. Welcome to this workshop. Can you hear me well? Please write in the chat and confirm that you can already hear me and see my screen, and then we'll start. Okay, that should be good. Thanks. Welcome to this workshop about deep learning. Today we'll do a brief introduction of the deep learning concepts. So how does it work? Why is it so famous and trendy? And in which context and for which use cases it can be used? Um, Maybe a little disclaimer. Probably today we won't talk about uh, ChatGPTs or chatbots in general. It will be an introduction about the theoretical aspects of deep learning and some maybe less famous use cases. I'm sure all of you have seen already too many um, videos and I've read a lot about chatbots, so we won't focus on chatbot today. But yeah, stay and you'll, I'm sure, learn some interesting stuff along the way. And really, don't hesitate to use the chat to ask any question if you have some. Um, and yeah, maybe we start just a quick word about myself. I'm Gaspar, the head of data science here in Data Scientist. So I've been working, yeah, a few years with deep learning models and machine learning models, obviously. And so let's start. The summary of this workshop. So some use cases and examples to start. If you have any ideas or I don't know, personal ideas or use cases you faced or situation you faced in your workplace or I don't know, personal life involving deep learning models, don't hesitate to write in the chat, and maybe that will be some interesting examples as well. We'll focus about data types and why deep learning models are interesting and in how is it different from machine learning and why is it so used for certain data types, certain specific data types, and then we'll talk about the math behind the deep learning models and the neural networks. So what we call the neuron or the perceptron, and then the networks that evolved. Yeah, the dense neural network are the logical evolution of the neuron. It's just multiple neurons, and then last part we'll talk about the convolutional neural networks. It's a complicated name. It's just a kind of networks that use convolutional filters or convolutional products for maybe those that are familiar with this mathematical concept. And it's networks that are used especially for images. So some examples and use cases, maybe a brief reminder about the topic of machine learning or statistical or automatical learning. It's the fact that you can use many examples of data you already possess to train a mathematical model or optimize a mathematical equation using certain conditions and parameters to achieve a specific objective. So here in this example, we have in what we call computer vision. So it's the field of machine learning that is used with images, and today it's almost always neural networks. We have two, maybe the most classical examples of computer vision. We use images. It can be videos as well, but here images. We have image classification, binary classification, or multi-label classification, or um, uh, multi-class classification. Three different kinds of classification, but the idea of classification is really to classify. It's really explicit. The answer is in the name. So we have to classify some objects or some data, here images. So you have an example of an image with a plant and a dog, and the question will be, is it a dog, is it a cat, is it a car? Or that could also be, is there a dog on this image? So if you have, here we have three possibilities. So it's a multi-class classification, and multi-label here bottom is when you can have multiple yes answers to different questions. So multi-class is you have different possibilities, but it can only be one. It's a dog, first example here, and in the multi-label example, the questions can have multiple yes answers. So yeah, just this example of classification, and the idea behind classification is really to give your model, your algorithm, your mathematical model a lot of different examples. So it's really similar to a child that would learn to recognize objects on a picture. So you have a child, you show to the child many different pictures of, let's say, dogs and cats of different breeds and of different size, colors, and furs, and so on. You give many, many, many examples, and each time with each example, you say, okay, this is a cat, this is a dog, this is a cat, this is a dog, and after this training process, at the end, you show a new picture to the child, and you say, okay, is this a dog or is this a cat? And the child has or should know the answer, and that's what you call supervised learning. We train a model with different already labeled examples for which we already know what we're looking for. That's really the idea behind classification. And so classification in computer vision especially is done with neural networks, because neural networks are and convolutional neural networks are really tremendously effective to deal with images much more than classical machine learning models, but the idea remains the same. We give a lot of different examples, and the model has to train to learn to distinguish between different classes. I don't know the background of each of you, so I don't know if this small reminder was necessary. Don't hesitate if you have any questions about general concepts of machine learning and deep learning during these examples. We have also what we call regression problem. So the same kind of supervised learning task, but here we are not trying to predict a class. We are trying to predict a numerical value. For those that are familiar with these mathematical concepts, it's the same as a linear regression or non-linear regression within linear algebra during mathematical courses. But here, just the name was kept, and it's the same kind of model but applied to data, and it's yeah, the machine learning regression model is just an extension of the mathematical model. So we are trying to predict numerical value, and regression in computer vision could be this kind of example. Here it's a member of our deep learning team, and the task here is there is two different tasks. The first one to identify the face of the person on the picture with this little square that we call a bounding box that try to detect the position of the face. So that's also regression, since the position is determined by the coordinates of the edges of this box. So we have a first task, and then when you have delimited the face and you're sure your model is sure that the image contains a face, you can extract many informations and characteristics about the person, or some feelings. For example, I have an example here. It's quite difficult, especially in Europe, to work with images of real people. You have a lot of rules in the GDPR for those that are aware of that. And it's really restrictive to avoid any leak of personal data or any bias regarding the predictions made by the model. So yeah, that's an also interesting topic that we won't have time to talk about today. Okay, so that's another example of computer vision. You have same idea of on the right, object detection, so the same bounding boxes, but for different classes of objects. So two different tasks. Try to find the object and then identify its class. so regression and classification. And on the left, what we call segmentation. It's similar to object detection, but much more precise. See, you're working with the precision of a pixel. As you can see on the car here is really identified as blue pixels, and it's really precise. And so the model behind that are uh, different, um, much more effective, but they are much heavier and harder to train, of course, and harder to store. The weight of the all this knowledge and what the model has to learn is much heavier, and it's harder to find already labeled data. Here on the right, if we take the same example with the child, you could take a picture like this and just show with your finger, okay, this is a bus, here, this is a car, or we have some bikes here, and could show that, or you could maybe draw a little box around the objects. That would be easy. And but on the left, if you have to really precisely pixel by pixel mark the boundings of each object, that will be much harder. So keep that in mind. Generally, when as a human, that will be a harder task. It will probably be a harder task for the model as well, and because you have to label the data, and because you need to have a model that has enough computing resources and power to learn these really specific features and details. That was also example in computer vision. You have on the left the landmarks, or on 2D or 3D. On the right, it's what we call a face mesh. It's a grid that really precisely detects the position of the key elements of the face, so the eyes, nose, mouth. You have the same for the hand, for the sign language, for example. And it's the kind of tools you probably many of you already use on social media with the filters, on, or with your yeah, any smartphone, or with just the app to take the pictures now have this. But yeah, it's really interesting and train with models as well. But once again, it will be really hard to precisely um, define this face mesh or grid for many examples. So this has to be different kind of training and a different kind of way to label the data, compared to the left. On the left, you could do that easily and just with your finger, or the mouse of your computer, but it's less precise. So this idea will be really present. You have a trade-off between being really precise, have models that can work with high definition pictures and that can extract many parameters, and you have a trade-off between that and the cost of labeling the data or training the models. Okay, yeah, last examples for computer vision, face recognition for personalities, or if you're working in a I don't know, in a company, or if you're working for a government and you have to identify the people using the passport. So that's something we can see today in the airports with many biometric passports. You just go in the cabin and you're recognized based on this image. It's the same idea of face recognition. And on the right, you have an example with videos. So now it's object detection, but since you have many images and the images follow each other, it's a sequence of images. You have to do object detection, but for objects that are moving. So object tracking, call that. Yeah, maybe it will be. I don't know. I don't know what's the best. Maybe like this is fine. Okay. If you have other ideas or examples of use of computer vision, feel free to write them in the chat. We have yeah, the depth map estimate, this one is really tricky and newer compared to the other. Is the fact that based on an image, you can estimate the depth, and so it's really used in the industry or in the chains of productions, especially in for to build cars or to deal with some specific um, uh, heat or material production, stuff like that. And short video of an autonomous car that combines basically the different almost all the different examples we've shown previously. So you have object tracking, you have object detection for stuff that are non-moving, the signs. You have depth estimate as well, to see the distance with the other cars. And actually, this kind of tool also include what we call lidar or radar detection to combine the image and also radar or lidar signal, and you can combine both these informations to have a model that's much more precise. There is a message in the chat, in the YouTube chat. We have the scene application for detecting riots or fights in stadiums. Yeah. When you have some large amount of people, it's really hard to see anything when you're looking at the video camera or when you're already working in the street as a, let's say, a police officer. So having ways of anticipate mass the I don't know how to say that in English. Um, Not sure if it's Mass Effect. Mass Effect will be the name of a video game, but maybe it's something like that. It's the yeah when a lot of people are moving in the same or in different directions, and it's really hard um, to escape from this group. So yeah, that could be a way to anticipate that using video cameras. But once again, the use of video cameras or images of real people in real time are, um, at least in the European Union, are covered and by some laws. So it's hard to access this kind of data, and so by extension, it's really hard to train the models and that will be using this data. What do we have next? Okay, next will be the examples in natural language processing. So it's the field, not with images now, but with text data or um, yeah, text data, audio recordings as well. Even if audio recordings, it's a bit tricky because it's in between text and an audio signal that could be processed as an image, but that's for maybe another day. NLP is mostly text, and it's the analysis of the language and the content of the text and how our language works, how we use it, how we are able to talk, write, understand each other, and analyze the contents of some text or sentences or books or tweets, comments on social medias. That's really maybe the most challenging topic of all, even more than dealing with images. It's newer and it required a lot of innovation and the creation of new kind of models and even new kind of networks. So small parenthesis, you've probably all of heard of ChatGPTs and stuff like that. Mentioned that earlier, but these are based on a kind of model we call the transformers, and that really did not exist a few years ago, and that completely changed the way we look at text data, even images for some specific examples, but especially text data. The hardest part with text data is the fact that the words are images. We know how to numerically represent them. You know, an image, it's a matrix of pixels. It's what you see on your computer. And that is mastered, or at least it's mastered, yeah, since a long time ago. But the text is really different. How do you represent text so that it makes sense for the machine, for the computer? That's the trickiest part, and that was partly solved in the early or in the late 2000, I think 2009, with a specific embedding of text. It's a mathematical representation of the text that has a meaning. That's what's used today to process text and data with neural networks, at least. So you can have some tasks as text classification. So we go back to this idea of classifying a lot of data based on examples. So you have a model that's able to read the text using this specific vectorial representation that we call word embedding for those that are interested. And based on this specific representation, the model reads a lot of different text or articles, and we say each time, okay, that is about this specific topic or this specific person, and you give a lot of different examples, and at the end, the model has to, for a new example, be able to predict the topic. So that would be text classification. We also have a task that's called topic modeling. It's similar but without the supervised aspect. So you're not able to really give the model the different topics. Let's say it's not the limits between the topics are not clear, or I don't know, you don't know the author of your text, and you want to know the author of the text based on the style, on the content. So you have a lot of different and really specific tasks, style transfer or topic modeling. We also have part of speech tagging. It's when you can identify the grammatical purpose of the different words. That's based on linguistic analysis. You have named entity recognition to find the entities in the text, so the dates, the names, locations, countries, specific numbers, names of brands. It's easy to do when you have already a predefined list of what you're looking for. If I give you this text and I say to you, okay, find the companies, that will be easy, or find every country. If you already know the list of all the existing countries in the world, that's easy. But in really specific tasks, you're maybe not familiar with all the entities you're looking for, and so the fact to be able to do it automatically, it's interesting. The parsing is also included actually in the part of speech tagging. It's to extract from a sentence the grammatical purpose and the links between the words. Yeah, that will be it. And of course, I didn't put it in slides, but of course now you also have the generative part. So generative, what we call generative AI, or just here for the natural language processing, that will be the generation of text data. That's what you have with the chatbots. The chatbots have two sides. One side that should be able to understand your query, what you're asking to the chatbot, and that's based on learning and knowledge from a huge database, actually. And then the second part will be the generation of text, how the model is able to create some text in a way that's very similar to a human being. And that's still challenging. I don't know if if you already use this kind of tools, but it's sometimes quite easy to distinguish the style of a human being and the style of a chatbot. Some strange sentences sometimes, but that's the kind of things you can do with NLP. And you also have some fields or tasks that are in between computer vision and natural language processing. Something that was released a few days ago, a tool from OpenAI that's able to generate a video based on some text, and that works quite well. And it's yeah, it's really in between the two, and so it's based on image processing. So you have this idea of being able to read these matrices of pixels. You have some understanding of the text, some generation as well, many different tasks and very challenging ones. All of that, we wouldn't be able to do that without the theory of the deep learning models and how they work. So I'm gonna dive into the deep learning world precisely. So, oh, sorry, it's in French. It's artificial intelligence. It's the whole field of artificial intelligence actually include a lot of things. The expert systems on one side, and maybe the machine learning on the other side. The fact that your model is trying to extract some patterns, and learn from the data. And inside this subfield, you have the deep learning, and the deep learning will be this same idea of learning, but using neural networks. And yeah, and today we are using it's an equivalence today when you have images or text data, um, you can or you almost always use deep learning and neural networks. Oh yeah, so the name was Sora about yeah, generate a video from text. Thank you for the comment. I forgot the name. Yeah, a really great question. Maybe I'm gonna show it here before we go to the theoretical part. What about voice and noise processing? Yeah, that's a great question. Voice and noise processing will be maybe closer to the natural language processing part, but between the computer vision and natural language processing, at least with the tools you have to use. Um, and you also have some signal theory. So you need different things. For the voice processing, you need to be able to understand what's being said. So for that, you need some analysis of the the content and so the linguistic aspect of what's being said. So that's one part. But first of all, you need to process the sound, and to process the sound, you need to process it with a signal. A signal is described by so you have a lot of different frequencies, and you can extract the key elements of the signal with some Fourier theory. For those that are familiar with that. So you're using some mathematical Fourier theory to extract the key components of the signal, and so that's that's a good start. Then you have to split the signal into multiple uh, time steps, and you have to be able to analyze independently these different time steps, and then join your different analyses to um, see if you can extract some patterns or some words that your model already knows. So there is a lot of different things going on, and yeah, so really challenging, but that also involves deep learning, but not only. The yeah, signal theory is quite important to be able to extract and represent your signal into numerical values and a sequence of small time steps with frequencies that you're able to process with your natural language processing model. You have some networks that are dedicated to voice and noise. That's called, but yeah, the most famous one is called WaveNet. You can have a look at that if you're interested. The research paper is quite hard to read for WaveNet, but yeah, if you're fond of math, that should be interesting. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the different examples of use cases for both computer vision and natural language processing. And I said that when you have image, video, text, audio recordings, the best kind of models are the deep learning models. Why is that? Um, the different kinds of data you can find are, yeah, uh, sh- schematized here. You have the easiest representation of data you can find is the structured data. All of you already are using everyday structured data, maybe even sometime without knowing it. Structured data is what you can find in Excel, in any tool that deals with uh, yeah, tabular data, and it's just columns, rows, and some numbers or values inside these uh, columns and rows. It's a big matrix of values, numerical values. It's easy to store, usually easy to read. For example, here we have some transaction IDs by just like transactions that were made by customers. So we have the dates, the category of product, and so on. That's really easy to store, analyze. You can have some create some statistical indicators based on the both columns and rows. You can do a lot of different things. And yeah, especially that's easy to store. And when you're using mathematical models, you need numerical value. Yeah, that you have to do with numerical value, because usually mathematical models are based on equations you want to solve, or constraints you want to reach in a specific vectorial space. You cannot just keep I don't know, dates like this, or have words, geographical coordinates, uh, I don't know, or image that are not processed. You need to have columns and rows of values you can numerically represent as numbers. Okay, and even this date here, it's not easy to process like this, but you can easily transform that into three columns: one with 28, the second one with 002, and third one with 2014. That's easy to do. But the important thing is that you already have a lot of samples with numerical value, and so you can feed your model with that, and each example will be a row. Okay, when your model is trying to learn, you give all of the rows. The model yeah, reads and learns from all of the rows, and it's pretty easy to do. Each row can be seen as a vector, mathematical vector. So that's easy. Okay, that's for structured data. On the right, you have structured or semi-structured data. It's a dictionary, or dictionary in Python, or a JSON data type. For those that are familiar with JSON, it's yeah, in Python we call that a dictionary, because it's each time the key and a value, same as when you're looking inside the dictionary, you have a word and its definition, and here it would be a word and that's the key and the value associated. So you can have um, dictionaries inside dictionaries. So that's not completely structured, and that can be hard to represent directly as a vector of numerical values. That will need a lot of processing, but yeah, that's still quite structured. The real challenge here is with this kind of data. So images, comments. Here it's the Trustpilot comment. Or general text data, and here audio signals. For these kind of data, it's obviously not structured like this one. You cannot have a vector or numerical vector that represent each example you want to give to your model. And we could try. For an image, we said that's a matrix of pixels that corresponds to the colors, or actually usually it's red, green, and blue. So for each image, you have three matrices of pixels: one for the color red, one for the color green, and one for the color blue, and then you combine all the three colors, and you get a multicolor image, or just one matrix if it's in black and white, or shades of gray. But so that's already a numerical representation. We could change it and put that into a vector. Okay, we could just squish the image to just a vector. So you take this matrix, this square, and you put all the numbers in a straight line, and you will get a really long vector with all the pixels. But that would be a vector. But if you do that, you lose all of the information that contains that the image contains. When you're looking at something with your eyes, or when you're looking at an image, what's interesting are the shapes, which pixels are next to each other, and why is the color like this? Because yeah, here in this example we have some yeah, the bottom left, it's maybe small, but you can see some sunset, the sand, some islands and stuff like that, and you can recognize them because of the shapes of the shades of colors, and that and if I try to take one image and put all of the pixel in a straight line, you won't be able to recognize anything anymore. And that's the same for the model. So you cannot really change and transform this image. So you need a model that's able to take this matrix as input. That's a challenge. Same for the text. We could say, okay, the first word is the number 1, the second word is the number 2, the third word is the number 3, and you take all the words in the English dictionary or in all the dictionaries, and you put a number for each word, and then you give that to your model. You could, that would be numerical values, but that doesn't make any sense. The order of the words wouldn't make any sense. That's why text data are particularly challenging. Same for the signals. You can represent that with some frequencies, but you have to deal with a sequence of frequencies and frequencies of sounds that corresponds to specific meanings or specific words or noise. So that's really hard. So you need different kind of model. You cannot use this data as you would use structured to call a data frame in Python, tabular data. That has to be different. Yeah, I don't really like this slide. Let's go directly to this one. That would be the representation of a neural network. You've probably, all of you have probably seen that already. It's written input layer on the bottom left. So you have some information that are taken as input, and at the end you have an information that's given back by the network, and that's the output. Remember the image of the dogs? You give the image as input, the network reads what you can read on the image, and at the end he answers he answers the question, is it a dog or not? So that's the output, the answer to your question. And everything that's in between, it's what we call the hidden layers. It's everything that the network contains as knowledge, as information he learned during the training process. How does it work? Each small circle that you can see in the network is called a neuron, a perceptron. It's once again a mathematical object. And each of these neurons works like this, like it's described here. You have there is 4 different things in this nice mathematical formula. It's basically a scalar product for those that are familiar with this concept. First of all, you have your data, your input. Okay, your input is x. It's the key letter of the alphabet for mathematicians, the X. So you have your input. The input is your data. Here, let's say we have 4 data points. So we have a data that's characterized or represented by 4 values. And you have here what's called the bias that correspond to everything that's not directly contained in these 4 values. Anyway, you have your input, your data, okay? That's the first thing. Then you have W, and before the bias, but W, that's the weight, that's the knowledge. It's really the knowledge. The weights are the parameters that are inside the neuron, inside so the neural network, and that are learned and trained during the process. That's the key value you want to um, you want to get. So that's the first 2 parameters, and then you have what we call an activation function, F, and the last one is H. It's the final output of each of the neuron. So a neuron, what does that mean? The neuron has a knowledge at the or current time t. You have the neuron has a knowledge, some weights that correspond to the knowledge. You do the scalar product of the knowledge and the input data. So it will be the analogy of the child. That will be the moment the child looks at the picture. The child looks at the picture. The child has his small brain, and you have the picture, you have the data, and the two interact within the eye when the child looks at it. Here it's the same. It's the scalar product. You have the input data and the weights, okay? And then you apply an activation function. So this interaction goes inside the, the brain, and this activation function tells the brain, is my output, so my output is the interaction, the output of the interaction between my knowledge and the image, or yeah, my knowledge and the data, is it interesting or not? It's an activation function, and so at the end you get the answer, is it interesting or not? You get a value that corresponds to the level of interest of this interaction between the weights and the data. Okay, that would be the analogy. It's really close to the neurons, numerical neurons, artificial neurons like this are, and this formula doesn't come from nowhere. It's similar to the way our real neurons work. You have input, you have some knowledge inside the neuron, and you have an electric signal that goes from the neuron to the next layer of neurons, and then that tells, okay, I have this insight, I have this information I want to pass to forward to my neuron colleagues. And here it's the same idea, okay? Interaction between the knowledge of the neuron, the input, and the output corresponds to the output of the activation function. So basically, is it interesting or not? And you have to combine a lot of, that's the way one neuron works, okay? And if you want to have a real complex link between the input and the output, you need a lot of different neurons, obviously. Otherwise, you will have just a linear relationship between the input and the output. If we had only one neuron, we would only have this formula here. So an F applied to a scalar product. And if you, let's say, you take F as a linear function, or even you take F as the identity function, the output will just be a scalar product between your weight and the input. That will be a linear relationship, and that's not enough. You cannot answer the question, is it a dog or not, based on an image only with a linear relationship and a scalar product. If you did a bit of math, basically a linear relationship would be a straight line. You could answer the question yes or no if only you had one parameter as input, basically, or you can have an hyperplan if you have multiple parameters, but that wouldn't be really interesting. So you need multiple neurons that interact with each other, and you need this activation function um, to create a nonlinear relationship between the neurons. And okay, so different questions. Let me show you the questions we have here. Is there a way to calculate RAM consumption for each hidden layer used? Yeah, a very specific question, but yeah, that's um, one of the challenge today with the let's go back to the chatbots and chat GPTs and the large language models that are also trendy. These kind of new models that deal with a lot of data and that have billions of parameters are really hard to train, and the optimization of this kind of product, or at least the training process, is really important. So yeah, we are able to compute that, and there is some research ongoing to reduce the impact of and the cost of this training process and how it works. Okay. First question. You have yeah, another question. H is Heaviside function. It's not always Heaviside function, but it can be. Uh, F is, or yeah, would be the output of the hidden layer. That's why sometimes it's O, sometimes it's H. What's interesting is F. It's the function you apply to your scalar product to add some nonlinear relationship between input and output, and this activation function changes depending on the context and what you want to get as answer to your question. And it depends if it's an activation function inside the neuron that's gonna give an information to another neuron. That's not the same activation function as if you were looking at the last layer and the final output will be the answer to your original question: is it a dog or not? In that case, you would have to you would need to have something indeed similar to the Vision function or a sigmoid function that gives you a binary answer. But if it's inside the network, it's a bit more subtle. Okay. The other question. Yeah, what will the weight correspond to compared to a real neuron? That's a great one. Let me show you. I can open. I anticipated in this question, so I opened the image. I don't know. Oh no, you cannot see it. Let me just change the screen. Yeah, that's maybe a bit small. I can zoom in. That will be a real biological neuron. I took this image on Wikipedia. So you have the inputs that are the synapses, and the synapses are the inputs and outputs. At least it's the connections between the different neurons, and it's the where the information can go in or out. Anyway, in between you have the I didn't know the name in English, but it's a scientific complicated name. The axon, it's where the information is processed by the activation function. It's the electric signal, okay, and the weights will be the soma, the cell body. Yeah, it's axon, the activation function, basically. So you see, in neuroscience, it's really similar, and that's one of the reasons why it works so well. The artificial neuron, it's not exactly the same, um, especially for the more recent neural networks. We've a bit shifted from that, but for the original perceptron, it's indeed inspired by this. Okay, I can go back to the slides. And yeah, just for the sake of the example, in Python, if you want to write neural networks like this one, it's really, really, really easy to write. You will just have to work with a framework of deep learning, Keras/TensorFlow, that's included now in TensorFlow, or PyTorch. TensorFlow is a framework of deep learning from Google, and PyTorch from Meta. And yeah, as you can see, it's 2 lines of code to import Keras. So you have to be able to use Keras. That's 2 you can remove. This one is to say, okay, I'm gonna build a neural network. So this one almost doesn't count either. So basically, it's 5 lines of code to create this network here. To say, okay, so that will be my input. That will be my layer with 4 values here, the next with 5, and the last one with 1 to answer my question. So yeah, really easy. You define the network with 3 lines of code, then you compile. So you say to your programming language, usually it's Python, you say, okay, I've created it. And at the end, you use fit, it's the training process on the data. You say, okay, that's my input X, and that's my labels for my, the answers to your questions for the many example you have for the training process. So I'm assuming you're already familiar with at least a little with machine learning and the idea of machine learning, but it's really, really easy to write. Different questions. Yeah, here we started the counting at 1. You can count, start counting from 0. Yeah. A good question. Yeah, you can add pretty much all you want, any number of layers you want, and for each layers you can have as many neurons as you want, and that's the trickiest part. Since it can be as complicated as you want, you have to make some choices because you cannot guess. Okay, I know I have to classify the dogs and the cats. Let's keep that example. I know I want to do that, so I'm gonna build a network that has, okay, 2 hidden dense layers with 4 and 5 neurons, and that will be the best architecture or the best network to answer my problem. It unfortunately doesn't work like that at all. You have to make some tries. It's really tries and errors. You have to try, you have to fail. It's computationally costly, and so it's also really time consuming. That's the main challenge with deep learning. Theoretically, you could answer any question with, or almost any, with a model as complex as possible in the whole and infinite range of possible models. There is probably one that corresponds exactly to the perfect one for your question, but we have no tool to find it. It's a field of research that's called neural architecture search. And the idea of this research is to find automatically, based on your dataset and your task, the architecture that answers your question or that at least corresponds the best to your task. And at least to my knowledge, in February 2024, we don't have the answer to that question. So you have to try, and that's why the best models that you can see out there are usually the models from the big companies that have access to many computational power and many data to train their models. The GAFAM, obviously, so the Google Lab, or some famous universities that have also a lot of researchers and money to invest in this research. Stanford, Harvard, for example, MIT. And that's one of the challenges. But something that's great in the field of data science in general, and in machine and deep learning, is that a lot of this knowledge is shared. So usually, let's say tomorrow, I want to build with you a model that's able to detect the cars based on some images. Okay, you want to do some object detection. So with this nice bounding box around all the cars, I can see in my images, and we're probably not going to start from scratch. We are going to use an already existing model that was previously trained by a company or a research lab, and it will be a way better starting point. So we have a model that was previously trained. So we have some different models that we can compare and choose one from a benchmark of performances. And we know that in general, or at least on a benchmark data set, this model was quite good at detecting cars. And we're going to take it, use it, and adjust it for a specific task. Maybe we are living in a country with strange cars or strange roads, and we have to adjust it and give new examples. But at least we have a starting point. We are not starting from just one neuron. That's the idea of, yeah, it's called transfer learning. And it's usually the way we work with deep learning. Since it's that difficult to create from scratch, we can take something already existing and use it. And usually it's almost always how it's done, except maybe when you have a really specific task and no one else before has worked on it. But yeah, usually we work like that. We have a really famous French company that's called Hugging Face. Maybe I can show you their website. Um, Let me show you Hugging Face briefly. Just change the screen. That's the Hugging Face website. Let's say we want to find our cars. So we are dealing with object detection. You can see on the left a list of possibilities. And I'm gonna pick object detection, okay? And then here I can see all the most famous model for object detection. There is one here from Microsoft, and I can find this model, read about this model, how it works, how it was designed, the research paper, and I can import it and use it for my own purpose. And this is really a game changer for deep learning, and that allows almost everyone work with quite easily with deep learning models. You still need the basics to understand how they work and how to use this kind of model with Python, but you don't have usually you don't have to create from scratch the models anymore, and that's much more interesting for everyone. Thanks to this kind of idea and thanks to the community of data scientists that are working with in this field. Um, okay, let's go back to the slides. And yeah, remember that when you're creating this kind of model, or even when you're importing one that's already existing, your objective is to optimize a task or optimize or find the best answer to a specific question for a specific task. And that's how the models really learn. You're giving some input data and you're asking a question. If you don't have a precise question, or if you don't really know what you're searching for, looking for in your data set, it's a different kind of task. It's unsupervised learning, precisely. And it also works, but that requires different kinds of models. And so always remember that it's not just taking the latest and the trendiest deep learning model is not always the best solution. The best solution always depends on the quality of your data, the quantity of your data, and precisely what you want to do. And all these steps you have to really define them before even thinking, okay, I'm gonna look on Hugging Face and take this nice Microsoft model. No, before doing all of that, you have to define your data science pipeline, know your data well, the content, quality, quantity, and what you can extract and what you want to solve at the end. How you're gonna formulate this into a mathematical problem and mathematical question for your model, and what you want to do with it. That's really important. What's the next slide? Oh yeah, and let's go back briefly on the and zoom on the convolutional part. So here we have the general idea, remember, of a neural network. We have some data as input. We have this relation between the weights, the knowledge, and the input, and this activation function that transmit the that gives the information to the other neurons, or that gives the final answer to the question. Okay. That works when you're able, once again, to work with scalar products. Scalar products are used with vectors. And vectors, so that will be, here my 4 data points. My 4 data points, I have my nice row in my matrix, so in my data frame, in my uh, Excel file or CSV file. I have a row with 4 data points, and I can use them as input. And then this information goes through the first layer, the second layer, and so on. When you're not able to use this vector, for example, with images, you have to think of a way to transmit differently the information. The idea, general idea of having a network that's interconnected and that has input, output, and some complex nonlinear relationship in between will always stay. That's the key idea behind the neural networks. But when you zoom in, this specific mathematical formula works with um, vectors, the scalar product. So for matrices, we have to find something that works well with the matrix. So if I have an image, I have 3 matrices for the pixels and the colors. I want a mathematical way of make my weight, my knowledge interact with the input. And to do that, we have a nice mathematical tool that's called the convolution. The convolution product, convolutional product, if you already know that from some old math courses, can be applied really easily here. The convolution, you see, it's just a matrix product, term by term matrix product. So here I have a small matrix, my convolutional, what we call convolutional kernel or filter, if I have multiple kernels. Here it's really easy, as you can see, so this nice star is the symbol for the convolutional product. That's my convolutional kernel, and that's my input, okay? That will be my image. That's my image, that's my kernel, and then I just have to make the product, so 1 by times 1 plus 0 times 0 plus 1 by 0 plus 0 times 1 plus 1 times 1, and so on, okay? That gives 4 here, because the only 1 and 1 I have are here, 1 in the middle, and 2 bottom left, bottom right. So that's 4. And you do that for every part of your input matrix or every part of your image. That's a convolutional product. And by doing so, you're able to make your weights, your knowledge, that the blue matrix interact with the input. And the rest is exactly the same. The same network architecture. I give my input at the beginning. I have some neurons that now interact like this, but then I have a matrix with numerical values. So that's great. I can apply my activation function and the information go through the next layer and the next layer and the next layer until the end. And what's great is I didn't have to change the matrix representation of my image. I kept a matrix And by doing so, I kept the pixels that are next to each other. I kept all the informations I had in my original image, the shapes, the colors, the borders, the basically everything I had in my image didn't move. It just was read by the kernel or by my neuron. And same, the output is of a similar shape. So I can do that once again and once again until the end. You can also apply what we call pooling, same idea of being able to read some information from a matrix. So on the left, we have the max pooling, and on the right, the average pooling. Here it's interesting because you can either average over a small area or take the maximum of a small area. And by doing so, you reduce dramatically the size of the matrix. So when you have huge images, the most recent images, have millions of pixels, and so you read the images, and if you keep all of the millions of pixels, there is too much information for your model and for your computational resources. Uh, and so you can also reduce this by using this function, and then keep one matrix that's smaller, and you can apply the convolutional again. Yeah, there is a great question in the chat. Question is, I don't understand how it interacts with the output. Isn't it just a simplification of the input? If you take only one kernel or convolutional product, you're right. It's you just get a smaller matrix with a specific convolutional product for a fixed and unique kernel. If I just take that, I have a different, probably simpler representation of my image. It probably doesn't look like an image anymore. There is some numerical values that are this output of convolutional filter. If you take just that only, if you didn't choose specifically a convolutional filter that was known to be efficient, probably that you just have to, you just have a simplification of the image. That's quite right. But what's great with the neural networks is that you don't have only one. You have as many filters here or kernels as you want, and all of them are not just defined by pure luck or randomly. They are learned as the knowledge of the network. So, and it's iterative. The first time, so that would be a convolutional network. The first time, the network here, so reads the image. You have the car as input. You can see this small box here is the kernel, all right? The kernel reads the input. The kernel reads the input and then take a value now, and you have all of these values. This box here contains all the matrices that were created by all the convolutional products. Okay, and you do that once. You apply an activation function as well to add some nonlinear relation, or it's not exactly linear, but to apply some to add some complexity. You add the activation function, and then maybe you want to use pooling to shrink down the size, and you take max pooling to only keep the maximum value of all the areas. And so for all this huge box, you keep the extremum values, and you do that again and again and again and again and again. And at the end, what do you have at the end? You have a vector, also a list of values, and each of these values is actually um, like a concentrate view of your original image. Um, at the beginning, you have a lot of pixels that were useless, and by applying convolutions to read in a certain way the image, and then the pooling and the activation functions to focus on the most important, or at least numerically important parts of this image. And by doing so a lot of times, at the end, you get a vector that's the concentrate information from your original image. But you're completely right. If you only do that once, taking random kernels and random activation function, that won't work. That won't mean anything at all. But if you do that multiple times for a lot of different images, and each time the neuron, so the first time the neuron look at the image, the network has a lot of filters, and your output really isn't clear. And so when the neuron gives the final answer at the end, based on everything he extracted, the answer to your question is not good at all. So the model is wrong. That's the first step, the first try. And you tell the model, okay, you're wrong. So the model is going to adjust a bit the coefficients and maybe the activation function, but usually the coefficients of the kernels. And he's going to try again on a second example. And you're going to tell him, okay, you're wrong, you're right. You're not really speaking each time. It's completely automated, but the model has the answer. If he's wrong or right, he knows. And he tries and he tries and he tries. And the more example you have, the more he learns, and the more he will be able to precise the value of the kernels and how he's able to read the images to detect the specific object you're looking for. And yeah, that's the perfect way of saying it. The kernel is calculated by the neural network exactly like a weight. It's exactly a weight, but a convolutional weight. It's not a weight for a scalar product, it's a weight for a convolutional product. So every step of the way, you have a coefficient that's able to read the matrix, to read the image. And for each example, each time, the model is going to adjust by knowing if he's right or wrong. And so next message is also completely right. In this particular example, when you're answering the question, is this a car or not, based on images of cars that are labeled, so for which you already know the answer, it's exactly supervised machine learning. It's exactly supervised learning with an architecture that's different, because in supervised machine learning, it's done in one step. You're giving your data frame, and depending on the model you're using, but all the samples are used to optimize a mathematical formula that's giving you the answer at the end. Or you have the model just look at all the data and find the coefficients that are the best for a specific objective and give you the answer. Here, the difference, first of all, machine learning models wouldn't be able to read the images with convolutional products. But here, the main difference for the deep learning, even if I didn't have an image here, is that it's iterative. The model is going to look at the first one and then look at if he's right or wrong, look at the second one, see if he's right or wrong, and do so until you tell him to stop. So he may look multiple times at the same image. You can add a new image along the way, along the process. You can take the same image, change the shape, the orientation, zoom in, change the luminosity, and add some random stuff if you want. But it's iterative and it keeps learning. It keeps learning. So in theory, that's why the space of solutions or optimal ways to find the best solution is larger than the space of solution of a fixed mathematical equation that define most of the machine learning models. But you're right, if I had tabular data, so just structured data set with rows for each sample, it will be really, really close to supervised machine learning here. So two key things for the neural networks, it's the fact that the concepts can be applied for different inputs as long as you change the way the neurons interact with the input. You can go from a softmax, sorry, that's for another thing. You can go from a scalar product to a convolutional product to a specific gate process for text data, but the idea remains the same. The model takes this way of reading the data and uses it to create its own representation of the data to answer your question, and it does that iteratively. In the meantime, I just wanted to show you something for those that are not familiar with the convolutional filters. Yeah, maybe I will show you that after. Don't know if I can show you now. Oh, okay, great, that works. I'm gonna change my screen once again. Okay. Sorry for the changes of screen. Here it's extracted from one of our courses. The nice platform you can see is the data scientist platform. And here we have an image in black and white, shades of gray, so only one matrix. And on the left, we have the convolutional kernel. And I can choose the kernel I want. You can look on the left, you can see the values changing. I can zoom in. Yeah, you can see the values changing each time I choose a different kernel. And on the right, you can see the impact on the image. So what you see here is the results of the kernel applied to this image. Okay. And if I want, let's say I take, oh, yeah, if it doesn't work, that's not good. Okay. Let's say I want to find the vertical edges on my image. I can use this convolutional kernel. Here, that's the output of the convolutional product between this specific kernel and my original black and white image. You can see the power of the convolutional kernels. So it's not really just random. Here, since you have a column of 1, a column of 9 minus 1, and a 0 in the middle, if we go back to how convolutional filters propagate through the image and how it works, you can write it down on a paper if you want, but it's really clear that here we're gonna basically take one pixel and subtract the pixel that's next to it and see the output. And by doing so, here vertically, we can see just the differences between the colors, thus the edges of the object, because when you change the object, and if you're able to see the change of object on the image, that means that you have a change of color. So if you have a change of color and you look at the difference between the colors, you'll see something like this. Same for horizontal. We can also add some blur as well. Yeah, hard to see for you, but it's clear for me that it's much less precise than here. If I zoom, cannot really zoom much more, but here maybe the contrast you can see. That's the stuff of kind of things that you can do on your phone as well with the pictures. Add some contrast, change luminosity, and so on. And yeah, that's a great question. Here the question, are these standard kernels for each of these detection problem, or is it just the output of CNN trained on this image? Here, there is absolutely no deep learning and neural networks involved. Here, I'm just showing you the output of a kernel applied to an image. So it's exactly standard kernels. the convolutional kernels and the fact that we're able to process an image using kernels existed before the neural networks that we use today. You had, if you want, on one side of the mathematical world, the perceptron and this idea of iterative process, and on the other side, or not the other side, but on another side, you had the image processing field with some kernels and that would just work because it's easy to use this matrix convolutional product. And just if you put the two together, you're able to train a network that will learn the best kernels for your objective. And that's the key thing here. It's the same for the text. We can add a way of representing the text data into the behavior, this iterative learning process of the networks to use deep learning for natural language processing tasks. Same for audio processing you mentioned earlier. Audio processing and the Fourier theory, it's a thing that's really famous and known in mathematics. And so you're using that at first to process the data or to guide the model or to use inside the model to process the data. And really, that's you understood everything, and that's great. It's really the general idea of deep learning. You have a neural network that learns iteratively, that interacts with the image using weights and activation function, and inside that you can really can basically choose the way that you want the model to interact with the data, and that's so interesting. Okay, and then a nice example of the outputs of the convolutional filters. That's not something that was anticipated, so we knew the behavior of the convolutional filters, as you saw, and we knew this idea of iterative process, but what wasn't guessed is how the models would learn the best filters. So we knew mathematically the model are programmed to learn the best filters, okay? But these filters, we don't know them. You can know the values of these filters that are learned. You can take a brain cell and look at the composition of this brain cell and the electric signals that are sent between the cells. But it's hard to say, okay, this cell corresponds to this specific information or was trained for this specific purpose. Same idea for neural networks. We knew the neural networks were programmed to learn the best filters to extract the most relevant information from the image to answer the question. But that's the result, and a really interesting result that emerged for the convolutional neural networks that are used for the standard computer vision tasks. The output was something like this. The first layer would detect low-level features. So the first layer will focus on edges, general edges or shapes, and then you will have mid-level features or more precise shapes, and at the end, the model would really focus on some specific part of the image. So that would be the output of some convolutional and pooling layers on the image. And if you're let's go back to the nice image of the Taj Mahal. If I wanted to guess the convolutional filters to extract the, let's say here, the bushes or the columns of the Taj Mahal, it would be really, really hard. And I would have to try and guess for hundreds of years, probably. But the model, since he looked at enough examples, was able to create the best interaction of different filters, a combination of filters, pooling, activation functions, to focus on a specific part of the image and have the best coefficient to extract the components for a specific part of the image. It seems really like magic. You see the wheels here, and some, I don't know what else we can see, but and it's the result of the complex and highly nonlinear relationship between the neurons that are trained to learn the best convolutional filter to read the images. And yeah, that's the summary of convolutional filters. And yeah, how it's written in Python for those that are curious. It's exactly like before. We define the sequence of layers. So we tell Python, my framework of deep learning, I'm going to say, okay, I'm creating a network, and then you're saying, okay, there will be these convolutional filters and pooling and that number and these parameters. And once again, you cannot guess the parameters and you cannot optimize them perfectly beforehand. So you have to use this idea of transfer learning and taking a model that was trained on a similar task and train it, use it, and then precise it, affine it. Okay, another question. What is exactly stored inside the CNN model? For example, is there different kernels for edge detection of artificial or of natural objects, or does it make best one fits all kernel? It depends. It depends on the tasks. And the model has to answer the question you gave it. So you're giving the question, you're giving a lot of different examples for a supervised learning task classification, and the model is programmed to learn the best filters that are able to match your general task. So sometimes, if your task is not precise enough, maybe your model will learn the best weights to detect cars, but for all the other tasks you're going to ask, he's going to fail. And that's possible. It really depends on how you're going to say the model, you're right or you're wrong. And that's the what we call the loss function, the way you're going to calculate the error of the model and tell to the model that is right or wrong. That will determine how it's programmed to learn and to optimize and find the best weight. So it's everything that's stored in the model are the parameters that are learned to answer your question, so to minimize the error of prediction to answer your question. And so, yeah, similar question. In each layer, same pooling filter has to be used? No. No, you can change the poolings. The filters are different because the filters are learned. Once again, here there is hyperparameters almost everywhere, and these are learned by the model. The pooling is not learned. Since the pooling, it's a choice of hyperparameter. You can choose different functions. The max function is always a max function, but that's also a parameter that you can optimize. And you're right, you could apply PCA or other operation for pooling. The most common one and what was proven as the most efficient are max and average pooling. But here you used average and max here. That's something you can change. That's something you can try this and then another one with an average instead of a max. You can use maybe a PCA or a dimension reduction or something in between. That's what, that's what's great, and also what's so difficult with deep learning models. It's that you can write it pretty much as you like, and that's why it's so costly to try all the possibilities, and that's why we use transfer learning to have a head start, or at least a place to start and not start from scratch. We will communicate different links in the YouTube description of the recording of this workshop. maybe different links to have some intuition about the behavior of the convolutional filters and the general idea of these and the mathematical process behind that. The to learn the best weights. I didn't mention it, but the key mathematical concept is called the gradient descent. So the model is going to optimize using the gradient descent method, that's a well-known technique. It's going to try to optimize to minimize the error of its prediction using the gradient descent. Yeah, I'm going to put some references and bibliography in the YouTube description. Feel free to look at, obviously, the data scientist website and look at all different trainings. Deep learning is really technical, so you need a little bit of mathematical background and some previous knowledge of machine learning, obviously. But yeah, that's a really, really interesting field, sorry, for data scientists and some mathematical curious as well. Last question, and after that, I'll have to close the stream. Yeah, it's also a great question. Are there rule of thumb? Yeah, we have rule of thumb that gives you a rough amount of parameters above which it shouldn't be really interesting to look. But there is not that many, and it's usually, yeah, as you said, rule of thumb that are not always precise, not always true. It's there is no mathematical results, to my knowledge, that tells you exactly the number of neurons, number of layers you have to use for a specific use case. And the rule of thumb we have most of the time are empirical. We use them because we know it was proven as efficient in many similar contexts. We have a famous French researcher that's called Yann Lequin that basically he and his team created the first kind of convolutional networks, and this gave some rules, advices that are still applied today to choose the right amount of images you can give at the model at the same time, or this idea of having convolution and pooling to concentrate the information in smaller matrices. That's also an idea that was given by his team. Yeah, there is some bibliography that gives you insights, but it's mostly empirical. So a bit frustrating for the math experts that like some proven results, and yeah, that's the difficulty of deep learning. But that's why it's so interesting. It's a completely open field of research and almost an open world in which you can walk and learn and stumble and learn again. But yeah, we'll put a lot of different references if you're interested in uh, looking further into these topics of machine and deep learning. Yeah, you should look for our data scientist training or data science in general. Thank you, all of you, for your really interesting question and remarks. And yeah, I'll put some links in the YouTube recording. Don't hesitate to leave a comment or ask questions on YouTube directly if you're interested in more. It was a pleasure. Maybe see you soon for another workshop. Yeah, I'll add some books as well. Books and website with nice videos and visualization to try and have an intuitive understanding of this concept that are not that easy. We can agree on that. Thank you. Have a good afternoon and weekend. Bye.